There is a particular kind of silence that belongs only to a house no one has entered in 4 decades. Not quiet, not stillness, something heavier than that, thick with the smell of wet pine, ozone, and velvet rotting in darkness. When 32-year-old Clara Harrington inherited the sprawling Sterling estate from a great-aunt she could barely recall, the probate lawyer slid a fat manila envelope across the desk. Deeds, property maps, a stack of unpaid tax notices, but no keys. She insisted, the attorney said, his voice wound tight with something close to discomfort. Clara made the 6-hour drive deep into the wet, isolating Oregon mountains, fully expecting to call a locksmith, maybe kick in a window. What she found instead was the massive, hand-carved oak front door already cracked open, waiting. Clara Harrington's life, measured by any standard you cared to apply, had collapsed completely. Her architecture firm in Seattle had cratered, leaving behind $80,000 in debt, an eviction notice stuck to her apartment door, and a slow-burning hatred for her former business partner, Thomas Gable, who had slipped away to Europe before the bankruptcy filings even landed. Clara was living from suitcases, surviving on instant ramen and freelance drafting work that barely covered gas money. So when the certified letter showed up, bearing the return address of Carmichael and Associates, she assumed it was another collections agency hiding behind a respectable letterhead. It wasn't. It was a summons. She found herself seated in David Carmichael's downtown Seattle office, staring at documents fanned across a polished mahogany desk. Carmichael, late 60s, tired eyes, suit pressed with military precision, folded his hands over a thick file. Quote 1, he began, each word placed like a stone on a scale. Quote 2. Quote 3. Clara traced the embossed seal on the death certificate with her fingertip. Quote 4. Quote 5. Carmichael replied, no warmth in the smile. He straightened in his chair. He paused, cleared his throat. Carmichael reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a small box lined in velvet. He opened it. Inside was nothing but a single folded piece of parchment. Quote 9. Quote, Clara let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. Quote 10. Quote 11. Quote, Carmichael's tone stayed flat as slate. Legally, the property belongs to you. Whether you choose a locksmith, a crowbar, or a conversation with the architecture is entirely your decision. But I should tell you, Josephine was deeply paranoid. I would advise caution. 2 days later, Clara white-knuckled the steering wheel of a rented Honda through rain-slicked switchbacks in the Cascade Mountains. Willow Creek turned out to be the skeleton of a logging town, a place where cell service died miles before the first building appeared. She followed Carmichael's hand-drawn map past the crumbling downtown, then turned up a steep, unpaved logging road that swallowed the grey afternoon light whole. Rain hammered the windshield in a ceaseless, hypnotic rhythm. The road ended at a pair of towering wrought iron gates. Rust had eaten deep into the metalwork. English ivy coiled through the bars in thick, aggressive tangles. The gates were unchained, pushed slightly inward, as though someone, or something, had forced them open years ago. Clara killed the engine, yanked the zipper of her waterproof jacket to her chin, and grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight. She stepped into freezing drizzle that bit at every exposed inch of skin. Oakhaven rose before her, 3 stories of Victorian Gothic architecture, dark weathered timber, knife-edged gables, narrow windows that stared back like hollow eyes. The whole structure loomed against the dense evergreen forest behind it, a bruised monument to something forgotten. The wraparound porch listed on one side, sagging under its own rot. What had once been gardens were now feral tangles of briars and dead rhododendrons choking each other for space. Clara's boots crunched up the gravel drive, each step obscenely loud in the silence pressing down around her. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She had a heavy iron crowbar buried in her duffel bag. The plan was simple. Smash a pane on the back door, get inside, photograph everything, and list this place on the market before the week was out. She climbed the rotting porch steps. The wood groaned under her weight like it was warning her. She crossed toward the massive double oak doors and started lowering her bag to dig for the crowbar. Then she saw it. The heavy brass handle on the right door gleamed, perfectly polished. Not a speck of tarnish. Everything surrounding it, the wood, the hinges, the frame, was beaten half to death by weather and time. But that handle shone like someone had buffed it this morning. And the door was open. Not wide, just 3 inches. A sliver of pure black gaping from the hallway inside. Clara went rigid. Every hair on the back of her neck lifted. Cold air exhaled through the gap. It carried a layered scent, dried lavender, stale dust, and underneath both, a sharp, metallic bite, faintly copper. If she is meant to claim what is inside, the house will let her in. Someone had been here, or someone was still here. Clara stood frozen on that sagging porch, rain dripping steadily from the rim of her hood. Every rational nerve in her body screamed the same instruction. Turn around, get back in the rented Honda, drive until her phone found a signal, call the sheriff. But there was the debt, the crushing, suffocating mass of it. And behind the debt, the image of returning to Seattle with nothing, facing the street. She drew one long breath, wrapped her gloved fingers around that polished brass handle, and pushed. The door swung inward. A prolonged, agonizing creak spiraled through the cavernous darkness beyond. Clara thumbed the flashlight on. A blade of stark white light cut into the gloom. The grand foyer opened around her like a mausoleum. High ceilings vanished into thick grey cobwebs that drifted in the draught like something half alive. A sweeping mahogany staircase commanded the center of the room, its steps buried under a moth-eaten runner, once crimson, now the color of old blood. Furniture lined the walls beneath white sheets. In the flashlight's beam, they looked like sleeping ghosts. __quote _14 _____. Clara's voice disappeared. The house swallowed it whole. Is anyone here? I'm the owner. Nothing answered. She stepped fully inside. Her boots stamped sharp outlines into the thick dust blanketing the hardwood. She pulled the door shut behind her. Total darkness collapsed around the single beam of her flashlight. She swept the light across the floor to orient herself, then stopped. Her breath caught hard in her chest. Her prints were not the only ones. From the front door, trailing right toward a corridor she couldn't yet see the end of, another set of tracks. Large, heavy treaded boots, and these were not old. The edges were crisp, undisturbed by any air current, any settling dust, sharp as if cut with a blade. Someone had walked through this foyer hours ago, maybe less. Clara's grip tightened on the metal flashlight until her knuckles ached. She held it like a weapon. Then she followed the tracks. The footprints led down a long, narrow corridor. Portraits of stern-faced figures lined both walls, their painted eyes seeming to pivot with her light. The hallway ended at an archway. Beyond it, an expansive room. Clara stepped through and lowered her flashlight. Her jaw fell open. The library was immaculate. No dust on the polished floor, no cobwebs in the corners. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves stood in perfect order, leather-bound spines gleaming. And the light in this room was not hers. A fire roared in the massive stone hearth, casting warm, flickering shadows across everything. Two plush leather armchairs faced the flames, and on a small side table between them sat a silver tray, a steaming teapot, two porcelain cups. I was beginning to wonder if the storm had taken out the lower bridge. The voice came from the shadows. Clara gasped, swinging her flashlight toward the sound. A man sat in the far corner, half hidden behind the tall back of a reading chair. He raised one hand against the blinding beam. "Please, Miss Harrington, lower the light. It's been a long day, and I already have a migraine." She kept the beam locked on him. "Who the hell are you? How do you know my name? I'm calling the police." "With what signal?" the man replied, perfectly calm, rising to his feet. He stepped forward into the glow of the fire. Late 50s, a surprisingly crisp tweed vest over a white-collared shirt, dark trousers. A neatly trimmed grey beard framed a face dominated by piercing, pale blue eyes that held equal parts exhaustion and razor-sharp intelligence. He didn't look like a squatter. He looked like someone who lectured on medieval history at a university. "Quote 20 quote," he said, keeping both hands visible, resting them on the chair back. "Quote 21. Quote 22. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. Quote 23. Quote 24. Simon replied softly. Quote 25. He crossed to the tea tray, poured a cup with steady hands. Clara stepped backward toward the archway, every muscle tensed to run. Simon raised the cup, took a slow sip. His eyes never left hers. Quote 29. He set the teacup down with a sharp clink. Quote 30. A beat of silence. Then his voice dropped lower. Quote 31. The blood drained from Clara's face. "You're insane. I'm leaving." "The front door was open when you arrived, wasn't it?" Simon's voice hardened. The polite veneer dissolved in an instant. Clara froze. Quote 34. Quote 35. Quote. He said it grimly. Then he walked to a heavy oak desk near the window and pulled back a velvet curtain. Behind it, shattered glass. Shards scattered across the polished floor like broken teeth. Quote 36. He turned to face her. Quote 37. Simon moved toward her, urgency carved into every line of his face. Quote 38. Clara stared at Simon Rostova. Firelight threw long, jagged shadows across his weathered features. The sheer absurdity of what he'd just said hung in the room. Thick. Suffocating. Bloodline? She could hear the tremor in her own voice, somewhere between terror and fury. What is this? A 19th century Gothic novel? I'm a broke architect from Seattle. I came here to sell a house, not to play treasure hunter with a madman. I am leaving. She spun on her heel, flashlight cutting back through the dark corridor. If you walk out that front door, Miss Harrington, They will kill you before you reach your Honda." Simon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The frozen certainty in his tone nailed her feet to the floor. "They've been watching the access road for a week. They let you drive in because they needed you to unlock the lower vault. Now that you're inside, you are nothing but a liability to them." Clara turned back slowly. "Who is they?" Simon crossed to the mahogany desk. His hand reached beneath the heavy wood. A quiet mechanical click resonated through the room. A section of the floor-to-ceiling bookshelf swung outward. Behind it, a bank of modern high-definition security monitors. Flat-screen technology concealed behind dusty, leather-bound volumes. The contradiction hit Clara like vertigo. "Your great-aunt was not merely a wealthy recluse," Simon said, his fingers already moving across a keyboard. The monitors blinked awake. Grayscale feeds filled every screen, dense forest pressing in from all sides of the estate. In the late 1980s, Josephine served as a senior forensic auditor for an independent oversight committee in Washington. Her assignment was to investigate a private military contractor, Caldwell Dynamics. Clara knew that name instantly. Everyone did. Caldwell Dynamics, a titan in aerospace and defense. Their logo graced the covers of financial magazines for decades. "She found a discrepancy," Simon went on, gesturing toward a monitor showing the rusted iron gates Clara had driven through just hours ago. A massive, systemic embezzlement operation funding illegal chemical testing on foreign soil. Off the books entirely. When Josephine brought the evidence to her superiors, she discovered the corruption reached all the way into the Department of Defense. He paused. 3 days later, her apartment in Virginia was firebombed. Clara moved closer to the screens. Her breath snagged in her chest. Monitor 4. A thermal camera. 3 bright white silhouettes, moving with deliberate precision through the trees behind the estate's carriage house. Each one carried a long rifle. Simon said, his voice dropping low. He drew a slow breath. Clara whispered. Her eyes wouldn't leave those thermal signatures creeping closer to the house. "Thallium." Simon's voice turned grim. Clara's voice broke. "The lawyer?" "David Carmichael is a very expensive, very compromised man." Simon's lip curled with contempt. A beat of silence. Clara didn't argue. The suffocating weight of her debt, all those numbers that had consumed her waking hours, shrank to nothing against the reality of armed mercenaries converging on the house. She followed Simon out of the library, leaving her duffel bag on the floor. They moved quickly through a narrow, windowless servants' hallway that reeked of damp earth and oxidized metal. Then down, a steep flight of stone stairs descending into the estate's cavernous cellar. The air plunged to freezing. Clara's breath curled into white mist with every exhale. Simon led her past rows of empty wine racks, past discarded antique furniture draped in shadow, until they hit a dead end, a solid wall of mortared river stone. Clara panted, sweeping her flashlight across the mossy surface. Simon muttered. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small brass medallion, heavy, cold. He pressed it into a specific stone, slightly recessed from the others. A sharp hiss of pneumatic pressure tore through the cellar. The river stone wall was a facade. It split down its center and retracted outward, exposing a heavy industrial steel blast door. Set into the middle of the door, a brass plate cast in the shape of a lion's head. No keypad, no keyhole, no handle. "Put your hand inside the lion's mouth," Simon ordered. His eyes darted toward the stairs behind them. "Are you insane?" Clara stepped back. "It's a biometric blood sampler." Simon's composure finally fractured, urgency bleeding through. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 65, underscore, underscore. His jaw tightened. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 66, underscore, underscore. The cellar lights convulsed, then died. The estate plunged into absolute blackness. Only Clara's flashlight cut through it, a weak, stuttering beam that barely held the dark at bay. 5 seconds. That was all it took. A guttural hum shuddered up through the floorboards as the backup generator surged to life. Harsh, red emergency light flooded the cellar. Everything bathed in crimson. Then the sound came. A concussive blast, deafening, bone-deep, shook the ceiling above them. Dust and mortar rained down in a choking curtain. "They've breached the kitchen!" Simon's voice tore through the ringing in Clara's ears. Heavy boots began hammering across the hardwood directly overhead. Rhythmic, deliberate, military cadence. "Clara, put your hand in the mechanism." She squeezed her eyes shut, shoved her right hand into the cold brass jaws of the lion's mouth. Pushed down. A sharp, stinging pain sliced across her index finger, clean and surgical. She gasped, tried to jerk free, but a hidden clamp snapped around her wrist, locking it in place. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 69, underscore, underscore, Simon barked. Above them, the cellar door exploded inward. Tactical boots struck the top of the stone staircase. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 70, underscore, underscore. The voice that echoed down was flat, commanding, professional. Clara's heart slammed against her ribs in a frantic animal rhythm. Click, click, whir. The machine processed the blood. Then, a heavy, metallic groan. The clamp released her wrist. The massive steel blast door cracked open a single inch, breaking its pressurized seal with a hiss. Simon grabbed the edge and hauled it wide with everything he had left. He shoved Clara through the gap, threw his full weight against the door, slammed it shut. The internal deadbolt crashed into place. One heartbeat before automatic gunfire sparked and screamed against the exterior steel. Clara collapsed onto cold concrete. She clutched her bleeding finger to her chest, sucking in stale, filtered air in ragged gulps. On the other side of that door, muffled shouts bled through the steel. The dull, rhythmic thud of heavy machinery striking the barrier sent vibrations through the floor beneath her. She looked up and stopped breathing. This was no dusty cellar room. It was a state-of-the-art bunker, climate-controlled, hermetically sealed. Racks of encrypted servers lined the walls, blinking with steady blue light. Filing cabinets stood in neat rows, and in the center of the room sat a massive safe. Polished titanium, industrial grade. Simon was already moving. He crossed to a computer terminal, fingers hammering a rapid sequence of commands. "Are we trapped?" Clara's voice came out tight, thin with panic. "Quote 72, quote 73, Simon said. His eyes flicked to a security feed on the monitor. Men outside, already setting up sparking welding equipment against the steel. His eyes never left the screen. A progress bar appeared, data copying rapidly to a small, ruggedized external hard drive. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 77, underscore, underscore. He ripped the hard drive free from the console, turned to the titanium safe, spun the dial with practiced hands. 34, 12, 88. He pulled the heavy lever. The safe swung open. No money inside. None. A stack of heavily yellowed bound ledgers, and resting on top, a single, thick, manila folder. Simon pulled it out and placed it in Clara's hands. "What is this?" Her fingers trembled against the paper. The tab read, "Harrington, primary asset." "I told you I was Josephine's curator," Simon said. His voice dropped, low, somber, weighted with something old. "But I wasn't always." He paused. 25 years ago, I was a security contractor for Caldwell Dynamics. I was part of the team tasked with hunting Josephine down. The folder slipped from Clara's hands, hit the concrete floor. She stumbled backward. "Quote 82. Quote 83. Simon corrected. "Sharp. Immediate. Quote 84. Quote." His jaw tightened. He paused again. Clara looked down at the folder on the floor. A sickening realization began forming in the pit of her stomach. Slow, cold, spreading outward like poison. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 87. Underscore, underscore. Simon said gently. Someone she trusted without reservation. "Your father, Arthur Harrington." Clara felt every molecule of oxygen evacuate her chest. "My father died in a hit-and-run on Interstate 5 when I was 16. "It wasn't a hit-and-run, Clara." Simon stepped closer. Victor Croft, Caldwell's chief fixer, forced Arthur off the road. Your father was transporting a ledger that documented the bribery of a federal judge. He gave his life so that ledger would never reach Caldwell's hands. Josephine was shattered by it. She severed all contact with your mother to keep you safe. But she left you this estate because you are the sole rightful heir to Arthur's legacy. Tears flooded Clara's vision, the crushing mass of her father's absence, grief she'd hauled through every waking day for more than a decade, twisted suddenly into something white-hot, blinding, uncontainable. Her father hadn't been lost to some senseless accident on a wet highway. He was killed to protect a corporate balance sheet. A curtain of orange sparks erupted along the edges of the blast door, thermal lances cutting through. The vault air thickened with rising heat. Simon crammed the rugged hard drive and a small leather-bound book into a waterproof canvas satchel, then hurled it to Clara. The drive holds the digitized ledgers, emails, and offshore account records, Simon barked. The book is the physical decryption key. Without it, the drive is worthless. There's a man in Seattle, an investigative reporter named Thomas Vance. Wait, no. Thomas Reed. Find Thomas Reed at the Seattle Chronicle. Put the drive in his hands. "And you?" Clara demanded, hauling the satchel over her shoulder. "I'm activating the Oak Haven Protocol." Simon turned back to the terminal. He flipped a red plastic guard off a physical switch mounted on the desk. The entire estate is wired with incendiary charges. It was always designed to be a pyre. "Simon, you can't stay. Someone has to hold the override so you can get clear," Simon shouted, seizing her shoulders and spinning her toward the rear of the vault. He shoved a rolling filing cabinet aside. Behind it, a dark, narrow tunnel carved straight into bedrock. Old Bootlegger's Passage runs half a mile beneath the mountain and opens near the logging highway. "Run, Clara. Don't look back." The steel door groaned. A massive, glowing red circle bloomed at the center of the metal. "Less than a minute." "Go!" Simon roared. He dragged a heavy revolver from his waistband and leveled it at the molten door. Clara froze for one fractured heartbeat. She stared at the man who had guarded her family's most buried truth for over 20 years. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she ducked into the black tunnel and snapped her flashlight on. The air was dense, wet earth and decay pressing against her throat. She ran until her lungs screamed and her legs turned to concrete, the jagged rock walls tearing at her shoulders with every stride. Behind her, dampened by tons of stone and soil, the vault's steel door surrendered with a catastrophic shriek. Through the tunnel came the distant staccato crack of gunfire. Then, seconds later, a colossal explosion seized the earth above her. The shockwave ripped her feet out from under her. She slammed face first into the mud. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, while a deep, resonant tremor rolled through the mountain's bones. Oakhaven was burning. Simon had honored his word. Clara clawed herself upright, pressing the canvas satchel hard against her ribs. Her father's killers were turning to cinder above her head. But the war was nowhere near finished. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and drove deeper into the darkness, toward the highway, toward Seattle, toward the reckoning Caldwell Dynamics had outrun for 30 years. The Oregon rain had sharpened into biting sleet by the time Clara hauled herself from the narrow, half-collapsed tunnel. She pitched down a muddy embankment, fingernails gouging exposed tree roots, and crumpled into a shallow ditch along the old logging highway. Miles behind her, high up the dense mountain pass, a monstrous column of orange fire punched through the heavy cloud ceiling. Oakhaven was gone. Simon Rostova and the Caldwell Dynamics retrieval team with it. Clara lay in the freezing mud, heaving for breath, the waterproof canvas satchel crushed against her chest like a life preserver. Shock was a luxury she could not afford. If Caldwell had operatives stationed at the front gates, odds were good a secondary team was sweeping the perimeter roads. Clara used the thin ribbon of tree line as her shield, pushing north on foot for 3 miles until she reached a truck stop glowing against the dark edge of Interstate 5. Inside the diner's restroom, she scrubbed mud and crusted blood from her face. Then she cracked open the canvas satchel to check the hard drive and found something Simon had never mentioned. Tucked beneath the heavy leather decryption book sat 2 fat stacks of $100 bills, cinched tight with rubber bands. Beside them, a burner cell phone. Simon had engineered her escape down to the last variable. She found a long-haul driver and pressed $300 cash into his palm, the price of a ride in his sleeper cab all the way to Seattle. For 5 hours, Clara sat in total darkness, the 18-wheeler's tires thrumming through her skeleton like a second heartbeat. She pulled out the leather-bound book, a cipher, columns of handwritten alphanumerics filling page after page. But when she turned to the final pages, a loose sheet of heavy parchment slid free and drifted to the cab floor. Clara switched on the small reading light. Josephine's handwriting, elegant, archaic cursive, stared back at her. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, I am dead, and the fortress of Oakhaven has served its final purpose. I am deeply sorry for the burden I have placed upon your shoulders, but you were the only variable Caldwell Dynamics could not predict. You must know the truth about your recent hardships. The bankruptcy of your architecture firm was not a stroke of bad luck. Your partner, Thomas Gable, was quietly bought out by Caldwell's fixers. They engineered your financial destruction deliberately. They made certain that when the moment arrived, you would be desperate enough to claim the inheritance and crack open the vault. But they underestimated the Harrington bloodline. In the lining of this satchel is a routing number to a secure offshore account in Geneva. It contains $12 million, the very funds Caldwell used to bankroll their illegal chemical weapons testing, siphoned from their ledgers over 3 decades by my hand. It is yours now. Reclaim your life. Avenge your father. Burn them to the ground. Tears, hot, searing, fell onto the parchment. Her entire life, her failures, her crushing debt, her father's death. All of it collateral damage in a corporate war she never even knew existed. At 6:30 a.m., Clara stood beneath the towering glass facade of the Seattle Chronicle building. The city was barely stirring, wrapped in a dense marine layer. She slipped past the security desk by folding herself into a cluster of bleary-eyed interns, then climbed to the 5th floor. Thomas Reed's desk was a disaster. File folders stacked into leaning towers, empty coffee cups, half-eaten bagels fossilized